Good morning. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. We are on lesson 12 of the Gospel of John. We're covering John chapter 6, verses 1 through 21. This one's called Massive Miracles. You'll notice a little bit of a bandage on my nose. I had a skin cancer removed yesterday, and I'm going to keep that bandage on it for about a month until it starts looking a little more presentable. All right, let's start. There were many miracles and events that took place between the end of John 5 and the beginning of John 6. But as we have discussed before, the purpose of John's gospel was to depict Jesus as the Son of God. John chose the events that made it easier for people to see that and accept it. Why didn't the gospel writers tell us everything? Well, John addressed that as he finished the Gospel of John. John chapter 21, verse 25 says this, "And there are also many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written." As I've mentioned before, some people limit Jesus and think that the only miracles that he performed were described in the Gospels. Instead, we cannot begin to estimate the number of miracles that Jesus performed in his 3-year ministry. He did not turn anyone down. If there was a person today with that power and ability, imagine what would occur as word spread that people were being healed. People would come from every hospital to wait in line to see Jesus. As word spread of this event, more people would come from distant locations. Every person I know has either personally experienced a moment when there was something they would have loved to have been healed, or at the very least, the healing of a loved one. This is not a perfect world, though we have one in our future. But as word spread in Israel about what Jesus was doing, he was mobbed every day. He was mobbed almost every moment of every day and worked tirelessly healing these people of illnesses, diseases, and the possession of demons. He had those rare moments of solitude, and as tired as he was, rather than sleep, it sounds like Jesus spent most of that time praying to the Father. The most amazing part of this all is not what Jesus did through his endless compassion. The most amazing part is that even with the signs and wonders, people still rejected Jesus. They gladly accepted his healing, but the vast majority did not continue to follow him. Let's read the first passage today. This is John chapter 6, verses 1 through 14, and it says this, "After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Then a great multitude followed him, because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, 'Where shall we buy bread, that these may eat?' But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little." One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many?" Then Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain so that nothing is lost." Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." This chapter begins with a common phrase used by John, "after these things," which is metatauta in Greek. We see this same phrase often in Revelation 2, and it connects the previous events to the current events being described. After healing the man on the Sabbath and claiming to be the Son of God to the Pharisees, Jesus gave us an example of power that only could have come from God. Jesus got in a boat and went across the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is not what we would call a sea. It's an inland lake, about 8 miles across, with a circumference of 33 miles. As Jesus was surrounded by people and crowds dangerously pushed in upon him, one of his solutions had been to preach from a boat, facing the crowd on the shore. This gave him enough separation for safety. And sometimes he would get in that boat and go to a new location. Imagine the time it would take to cross the Sea of Galilee by boat in comparison to the huge multitude of people who would need to walk at least 16 miles to get to the same location. This gave Jesus a time to rest and a time to pray. In today's passage, we see that Jesus went up on the mountain with his disciples. On this day, the multitude had found where Jesus was, and many were approaching. When we assemble the information given by all 4 gospel writers, we learn that there were 5,000 men, but this does not include the number of women and children also in attendance. There could have been as many as 25,000 people there that day. According to Luke, in Luke 9, this event occurred just after the return of the disciples from their missionary trip. Jesus had sent the 12 out in pairs, with instructions to not take anything with them. But Jesus gave each of the 12 disciples the same powers he had been using: the power to heal, the power to cast out demons, and even the power to resurrect. Most importantly, they were to preach the gospel. This was an important step in the lives of the disciples, as Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen. He would be crucified, would rise from the dead, and would return to heaven. And he would assign his disciples the task of spreading the gospel to the 4 corners of the earth. We know how well they performed that assigned task because the gospel has been spread to each person hearing or reading this message. This event occurred with Passover approaching, so it was likely 2 years into the ministry of Jesus and 1 year before the crucifixion. Jesus asked Philip where they could buy bread to feed this huge group of people. But Jesus asked this question as a test, already knowing how he would address the situation. Don't forget that the disciples had just returned from performing their own miracles, and this private talk with Jesus had been similar to a mission debrief. This is important. If the disciples would have stepped up with the power they had been given by Jesus, it could have multiplied the ministry 12-fold. Think about what is going to occur in the tribulation when God sends out a remnant. 12,000 supercharged Jews from each of the 12 tribes of Israel will preach the gospel to the world. That is going to multiply the ministry of Jesus 144,000-fold. But that is not what occurred after the return of the 12. Instead of thinking outside the box when considering how to feed a mob of up to 25,000 people, their solutions remained far inside the box. We have 200 denarii, nothing more, and that is not nearly enough to even buy bread for this group. Andrew told Jesus that the only food he was aware of was a little boy with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. These barley loaves were not anything like a baguette. They were more like a cracker or square of matzah. But they also were barley, which was less expensive. Bread usually eaten by the poor. It was not even a big lunch for a little boy. But Jesus had a plan, and it involved multiplying that small lunch to satiate every person, to feed them so much they could not have eaten any more. And when they had finished, there were 12 baskets of fragments remaining. In this miracle, the word for basket means a basket about the size of a lunchbox. There would be a similar feeding that would happen at another time with 4,000 men in a different location near Decapolis, and with a different number of baskets remaining of food, 7 instead of 12. In addition, the word for basket used in the second passage is a very large basket, much larger than the baskets of leftover fragments in the feeding of the 5,000. Some Bible scholars believe that the first feeding depicted in today's passage points to the Jewish believers with 12 baskets reflecting the 12 tribes, and the feeding of the 4,000 points to the Gentile nations, as it took place in Decapolis, a Gentile area, and the 7 baskets pointed to the 7 different groups of people who populated Israel before the Jews arrived in the Promised Land. I also have thought that there could have been 12 baskets remaining, one for each disciple, to address their unbelief. To me, this is one of the biggest miracles performed by Jesus, and certainly Jesus wanted the disciples to see this miracle. I think Jesus was addressing the doubt of the disciples, especially after returning from a time when they had been called to perform their own signs and wonders. Almost a year later, Jesus had an interesting discussion with his disciples at Caesarea Philippi about who the people said Jesus was. And the conversation continued with Jesus then asking, "Who do you say I am?" Peter gave the best answer. Matthew 16, verses 16 through 17 says this, "Simon Peter answered and said, 'You are the Christ, the Son of the living God.' Jesus answered and said to him, 'Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven.'" Jesus not only claimed to be the Son of God, but revealed himself to be the Son of God through his signs and wonders. But remember what happened immediately after Peter gave this wonderful answer and moved to the head of the class. Jesus told them of his arrest, death, and resurrection to come, and Peter denied Jesus, stating that those events would not happen. We can understand the heart of Peter, not wanting those events to occur. But if we truly believe that Jesus is the Son of God, we also fail any time we deny the attributes of God. Those attributes of God were observable in Jesus when he was in his ministry. He was omnipotent, omniscient, and immutable. If he said something was going to happen, it would happen. There were aspects of those attributes that Jesus chose not to use while in his ministry. Jesus voluntarily set aside aspects of these attributes when he came to earth. This is referred to as kenosis. But Jesus demonstrated to the disciples that he was the Son of God. In time, each of them would believe that wholeheartedly. But it seems they understood that claim by Jesus, but did not quite understand how to apply it. Let's read the next passage. John chapter 6, verses 15 through 21 says this, "Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. Now when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into the boat, and went over the sea toward Capernaum. And it was already dark, and Jesus had not come to them. Then the sea arose because a great wind was blowing. So when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near the boat, and they were afraid. But he said to them, 'It is I, do not be afraid.' Then they willingly received him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land where they were going." There's a lot happening in this brief passage. First, we are told that the people wanted to take Jesus by force to make him the king. Jesus understood that this was not a part of God's plan, though he also knew that on Palm Sunday, the week before his crucifixion, the mob would cry out, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," as he rode down the Palm Sunday road on the foal of a donkey, and at least momentarily they would acknowledge him as king. But the mob would call for his crucifixion a week later. Jesus, knowing the Father's will and doing everything in the Father's will, did not allow the mob to do this. To stop this from happening, Jesus went up on the mountain alone and sent his disciples across the Sea of Galilee by boat to Capernaum without him. Don't forget that perhaps as many as 7 of the disciples were fishermen, and everyone but Judas Iscariot was from the Galilee region, so they were very familiar with the Sea of Galilee. While they were in the boat, the waves were large because the wind was blowing. This may have been a satanic influence upon the weather, but storms are prevalent on the Sea of Galilee. When the wind comes down from the horns of Hattin, the waves on this lake can be very large. The disciples were near the middle of the lake, as John writes that they had rowed for 3 or 4 miles. Other Gospels tell us that they saw something on the water, but did not know that if it was Jesus, and they were greatly afraid. John tells us that they saw Jesus walking on the water, and it was not until Jesus identified himself that they welcomed him into the boat. Matthew tells us that Peter walked on the water with Jesus, but John reveals a different miracle. Then they willingly received him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. It had taken the disciples hours to row to the middle of the lake, but after Jesus got into the boat, they were immediately at the shore. He moved that boat instantly too, but honestly, why would they ever need a boat? During the ministry of Jesus, he did not reveal himself as the Son of God to everyone. He certainly revealed this to his disciples, and we also can see that in the ministry of Jesus, he first revealed this to the Samaritan woman at the well. He also revealed this to the Jewish religious authorities, particularly the Pharisees. But most of the Jews were waiting for a conquering king, someone to rescue them from Roman rule, but did not believe the Messiah would be God, nor the Son of God. The Jews do not think that the Messiah they still are waiting for will be God or the Son of God either. There are verses in the Old Testament that reveal this, but somehow they have either ignored or misinterpreted those verses. This is why John wrote the Gospel, making sure that we know that Jesus is the Son of God. It is one thing to be the Messiah, to save people, and quite another to do what Jesus did. As God, he lowered himself to become man. He lowered himself to suffer and die, even the death of the cross. Jesus was willing to give up so much to reveal his love to us and give everything. We know that there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for a friend. But Jesus did that for his enemies too. While we were still sinners, while we were still at enmity with God, while we were still enemies with God, Christ died for us. Don't underestimate what it took for Jesus to demonstrate this love to us as the Son of God. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Have a blessed day.